Um, it's pretty hard to formulate your own legacy, I think, and it's hard to know, um, you know, what future generations will be interested in. Um, I would hope that people will just see that I was an interesting, engaged person who, chose these sort of ways to respond to things. Yeah, I don't know. That's a hard question. I have. I've sold some work. I have a little bit of work in institutions. Not enough that I think it would be like a legacy. I hope they make a really great Hollywood movie about my life, and I hope someone, really handsome gets to play me. I think that would be a really great legacy. I think probably, just talking about the range of my work over the past 20 years, the piece that has definitely had the biggest sort of public response and has generated the sort of most documentation and the most dialogue, is the Band-Aid piece, All My Little Failures, which I've also shown. I've shown it like all over the world, and I think that would probably just be the piece that sticks with people the most in terms of what I've produced. On the other hand, saying that, it's a piece made out of Band-Aids, so it's actually a pretty delicate, pretty ephemeral material, and what its longevity is, I don't really know. So maybe the documentation will live on, but the piece may not. I don't know. Who knows? All My Little Failures was the first sort of piece that I started to do when I moved to Hamilton, and I sort of broke away from my drawing practice. I'd always been intrigued by Band-Aids as a material, and I started making little shapes out of them, little balls and little kind of anthropomorphic shapes out of sort of wrapped Band-Aids. And over maybe a year of doing that and just kind of experimenting with it, I realized that I wanted to make something big enough that it would cover me. And so I got the idea to make this sort of cloak or garment or burqa. And once I had sort of started working on that and started sort of seeing how it would interact with my body, I thought, oh, I have to wear this, and I have to actually perform it. I can't just make it and stick it in a museum or something. I have to actually put it on and go out on the street and wear it. And so that kind of, it was funny because it was like, I don't have a background in performance or anything. I don't, I studied as a painter really. And so I was sort of coming to this other branch of work through a really, almost a sort of virgin approach, and just kind of trying to see my way into it. And the work created its own demands. So I think that was a really interesting process for me. And then actually going out and doing it and, just wearing this thing on the street and interacting with people has become a really interesting experience for me and for the other people who sometimes perform it for me as well. So, well, the Vancouver episode, actually, I was in Vancouver and I had the piece with me. And there's an area outside the Vancouver Art Gallery where there's a large set of steps, and people sell stuff on the steps. A lot of people sell little paintings or little macrame things they've made or whatever. Like vendors set up on the steps, and they try and sell stuff to the tourists. And so I was in Vancouver and I had the piece with me, and I thought, I'm going to go down there and just do a performance. And I put the piece on. And I started wandering around in front of the steps and then in front of the gallery. And I was kind of just trying to interact with people, and I was handing out Band-Aids to people, which is what I do usually when I'm wearing it. And I don't usually speak when I'm wearing it. So, and a security guard, as I kind of got closer to the main door of the art gallery, a security guard came out and came over and spoke to me and, told me that I couldn't do this on the property and asked me to leave. And it was funny because just before that happened, a guy had walked past me, and a lot of the time people's reaction is to sort of really ignore me, like they sort of look away and everything. And this guy had done that, and he was like a middle-aged, guy. And as the security guard was talking to me, this guy, he came out of the art gallery, and he came up to me and he started to apologize for having ignored me like that. And first, he was like, "Oh, I hope I didn't make you feel bad the way I kind of, just ignored you and walked past you. And, that was really rude of me." And so it was interesting. I had this guy sort of apologizing to me, and then the security guard telling me to get off the property, which was, interesting. But I thought, I was really proud that I got kicked off the property. I was like, that was like a real badge of honor that I was ejected from, it's like, and, at the same time, I wasn't invited to be there. I wasn't asked to perform there. I was just there on my own, on my own trip. So I was amused, and I was actually really proud that they, that they thought it was disturbing enough that they had to ask me to leave. They don't, they let all the vendors sell all their stuff on the steps, and so I was like, oh, wow, they're asking me to leave. Wow. No, it was always like a garment that was worn. It was actually, I think it was first shown in Ottawa at La Petite Mort Gallery, and it was actually someone else who wore it. Although I think I did wear it too for part of the evening. But I think it was someone else was wearing it for part of the evening because I wanted to see how it looked. And it was interesting talking to them about how they felt about wearing it. And they were talking about how sort of isolating it was, and the sort of feelings it brought up for them of people looking at them, but at the same time, like stepping away from them and making space. Like, so it was really interesting to hear also how someone else experienced it in performance, and their sort of response to the piece. It's interesting because, it's interesting to me because I always feel like I learn something from a performance. Like somebody always has a reaction that you weren't, you hadn't anticipated, or you hadn't, planned on, or just people always bring some other perspective to the work from, rather than my own. So I always feel that it's interesting to hear other people's take on it. One of the things early on that really surprised me was someone was talking to me about when I was performing it on the street here in Hamilton, actually, and afterwards someone came up to me and they said they didn't know how to respond to me because they didn't know what gender I was, and they didn't know if I was a man or a woman, because when I'm covered, you can't really see who's under there, and they were talking about how confusing it was for them, just in terms of their own response and not being able to sort of formulate a behavior because here's this person of like no gender. So, and I thought that was really interesting because I hadn't really considered that as part of the piece. But yeah, they're having their own response for sure, which I think is great. And to me, that's like a learning thing. That's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or I hadn't, that hadn't been my intention with the piece. But if that's how you're responding to it, that's really interesting. I haven't mentioned the huge bonfire that we're going to have. No, I'm kidding. I'd just like people to be able to engage with it when I'm not here. And I kind of see that in a more, like, I'd like people to either have a piece that they engage with sort of one-on-one in their home in a very personal way, Or as I was saying before, kind of jokingly, when the movie About My Life comes out, I think that will be really, it'll be nice to see an Oscar-worthy screenplay and, some really fabulous direction. So. Yeah. Again, I think the Band-Aid piece is the one that seems to have the most resonance for people. So I think that'll probably have the longest. Yeah, the documentation for things. But it's funny because I was thinking about this morning. Like, we think that now that the digital age is here, we have all these amazing sort of opportunities for archiving, and there's this huge cloud of information that's going to live forever. And it's like, 25 years ago, no one even had thought of what the internet was. Like, so maybe in 50 years we'll all be off on some other tangent, and all this stuff in the cloud will just vaporize, and who knows. Oh, Canada revenue. My opinion about that, I sometimes donate work to to fundraising auctions for various causes, and when I donate a work, the amount of value put on the work, not the amount necessarily that it sells for, but the assigned value, is then considered income in my tax stream. So I have to pay income tax on that valuation. And I think a lot of artists don't know that, or they just assume that when they get a tax receipt from an auction or something, or a fundraiser, that they can claim that against their income, and it actually is their income. So they actually have to pay tax on it, which seems kind of crazy, and it puts artists in a kind of crazy position. And I think the people who should be donating to fundraisers and auctions and stuff are not the artists, but are collectors. Collectors have had like an easy ride for a long time, because they go to these fundraisers, they buy up work, really undervalued, in an auction situation. They get maybe say a $10,000 piece for like a few $1,000s, and they're happy. But then the artist still has to pay tax on that. So the artist is the person who's like getting the least amount of benefit, and the art collectors are doing pretty well on it. So I think fundraisers and people like that should be targeting collectors more if they want to sell work, to make money for whatever institutions or whatever they're supporting. And the collectors should put it out there, not the artists.